Okay, first off, I'm sorry because this will be the most painful thing to watch ever. And I usually like the most if I would be a good teacher, which I am probably not, then I would have showed this at the beginning of the course. However, if I would have done that, then you would have probably taken your computer and thrown it out of the window and you wouldn't have watched the rest of the course. So I'm showing it to you in the middle of the course. So, and today we want to talk about the SOP, about software development. We call it the SOP Integrated Software Development. And why is this so terrible? It's because it's a super lengthy document. It's sometimes not really connected to reality, as many documents are. For example, the soup list you already saw. And it's just super, super complex, and people just generally hate working with it. But it's one of the documents you have to create. So let's get this over with and hope that we don't have to spend too much time on this. But I don't have super high hopes. So what's the problem? The problem is I kind of like dived in the 6304 course. I just dived into random stuff and showed it to you. For example, how you create a new product in Formwork, how you document software requirements, how you document software tests, how you document soup. But at this stage, you're probably wondering, well, what's the total like list of stuff I have to do, and how do all these things like add up to a bigger concept? How do they tie in with all the other activities? And that's the question I want to answer today. And if I would have answered it earlier, you would have, yeah, okay, that wouldn't have been a smart idea. So you need to create a document which is called SOP Software Development. Why is that the case? I'm not sure if you've watched the other videos of the 13485 from my colleague Sven, at least currently my colleague Sven. Those are the videos we have right now. Those are about setting up a quality management system for medical device compliance. And there, the way to comply is you have to create a lot of SOP documents. So for example, the ISO 13485 says, hey, you need to have this described a process for how you train your employees. And how you do that is like you create a crappy document and you name that like SOP training, for example, and you say like, hey, step 1, a new person is onboarded, step 2, we train them, and step 3, everyone's happy. And then you would fulfill that requirement. Likewise, the 60304 says like, hey, you need to like describe your process, how you develop software. And the typical way how to comply with that is to create a document which is called SOP Software Development. And in that, likewise, you kind of like say, step 1, we come up with a plan and what we want to develop. Step 2, we write the code. Step 3, everyone's happy again, and maybe we test it. And that's cool. And then you're 60304 compliant. However, the 60304 requirements aren't quite as simple as that. They're slightly more lengthy, and that's why we have this gigantic, huge SOP Integrated Software Development document, which has, I don't know, 12 steps or so instead of 3. You can find it on our website, as always, in the template section, and then there in the 6304 template section. I already opened it here somewhere, and you can see it here. And you can see this is like the mother of all documents because it fulfills all sorts of sections in the standard. So, for example, section 721, only relevant for classes B and C, are fulfilled in these sections of the document. And the crazy thing is it even fulfills other sections of other standards. So here's the standard for risk management, and we have a separate video course on that. And here's the standard for usability, when that's also a separate course. However, this we kind of like decided at the time, I decided, but it was just me at the company at the time, to create one huge document which describes the process which ties in compliance for multiple standards. Not sure if that was the best approach, but well, here we are. All right, you can kind of like see it has different steps. So step 1 is like you have a design input, you want to develop something. Step 2 is like you plan your risk management, I guess. And then blah, blah, blah. At some stage, you develop stuff. I think it's here. Number 6, implementation. Then at some stage you test it, number 8. And then at some stage you release it, step 11. We have 11? Yeah, it's only 11. So that's how it works. At each stage in the process you have, and this is quite typical for process documents in any sort of compliance industry, is you prove that you went through the step of this specific process because certain documents or records were created as outputs. So in this case, the step 1 design input is like, this is probably the stage where you theoretically as a company decide you want to build a certain product or solve a certain problem. So you have an input and you have an output, and an input could be literally random stuff, like you have an email from a potential customer, like business input, or your software developers, your engineering staff kind of like says, yeah, we should be solving this problem, whatever, or you just have a random product idea under the shower, whatever. You don't really need to prove this in any way. I think the output here is more relevant. So you create something called an intended use document, a medical device classification document, and by the way, the 62304 device software safety classification, which we just saw in the template for software development and maintenance plan. So the idea kind of like is here, you have created drafts of these documents, and these kind of prove that you went through this design input step. And now you could think, can we just skip this step? And the answer is no, because, well, these steps, we created all these steps because that's the minimum set of stuff you have to do for regulatory compliance. So that's the content you have to have in your SOP. I mean, you could structure things differently. You could kind of like, and this is what actually probably every other consultant on the planet does, they don't do one SOP for these standards, they separate this into multiple SOPs. So you could separate this one big SOP into an SOP for risk management, which covers this standard, an SOP for usability, which covers this standard, and an SOP for software development, which covers this standard. However, that kind of like in our experience got super confusing because actually you are usually doing all of those activities sequentially or even at the same time. So that's why we came up with the biggest innovation I guess humanity has come up in the last 5 years in regulatory compliance, which is the Integrated Software Development SOP. So that's how this document happened. Oh man, I hope I hope you're still awake. This is not interesting. Anyway, so what's your to-do here? In Formwork, as always, you create this and copy this to your folder structure. However, there's a big difference here because you are not copying this to your product's record section, because this is not, and this is like a weird thing, I don't know, this is just a weird differentiation, which I don't know, regulatory people came up with, is an SOP generally is not a record. Don't ask me why, it's just that's the way it is. So SOPs usually actually don't live in your product's record section, they live in your QMS document section. And there, you usually have a folder called SOPs. If you sign up for Formwork after a certain date, I think we even create this folder for you. So how do you get this SOP into the SOPs folder? You go to the Open Regulatory Template section. This is it actually technical documentation? Check. SOP. No, it is not. Oh man, losing track of my company here. SOP, here it is. Okay, so it's in the quality management section. It is this one. And then now we're hitting the button create new document using this as a template, because again, SOPs are documents, not records. So create new document. We want to copy it to the SOPs folder in this case. And then here you can edit it. And while editing it, I'll also explain it a bit. And I probably won't save it because otherwise Sven, our quality management person, he will kill me. We already have this in some way or another. So you have these steps. Okay, step 1, design input. Step 2, risk management planning, yada, yada, yada. The super high level summary of this document is it has a lot of content in there already, and this content is optimized for being compliant and passing audits. So every time we went through an audit with a customer, and there have been quite a few in the past 5 years, we went ahead and always updated this document with the audit findings. If an auditor kind of like said, yeah, you should kind of like add more bullet points here because whatever, you have to describe in more detail how to do risk analysis. And by the way, I think this actually happened. Then we go ahead and update the template. So you benefit from this, and this template is pretty solid regarding passing audits. Now, it already has a lot of these texts here. If you think you want to do things differently at your company, that's totally fine. So kind of like look at this text and then like adapt it to how you would think you could do things at your company. Or in the more likely case that you're just like a small startup and you're like, hey, we just want to be compliant and we need like a blueprint to be compliant, then my recommendation would be read all of this text kind of really carefully, understand it, and just accept it as it is. And then make changes maybe further down the line. You can always change SOPs. That's kind of like a big thing. You can always, in the future, you can always say like, oh no, we actually want to do things slightly differently. Yeah, no problem. Change this SOP and then sign it in Formwork and you're done. Yeah, so, oh man, should I walk you through all the steps here? I mean, read the text first and then we'll see. But the general idea is, okay, step 1, you have a design input. Step 2, you kind of like start the first steps of risk management. And here you can see why we're tying in multiple standards into one SOP, because the activities are somewhat just like linked. Like you have to, the risk management standard says, yeah, you should start doing some risk management activities before you start development. So why should I create a separate SOP about risk management if it kind of like is adjacent to the development process? So that's the idea here. Here you kind of like already start creating some risk documents, and we'll talk about those again in a separate course. Here you do some further risk assessment and come up with even more risk documents, and we'll talk about those too. Here you do software planning, and by the way, the output of this is some of the stuff we already looked at, right? So you have like your software development and maintenance plan, one of the last few videos, even the last video, software requirements list, your software system test plan. That's actually just the list of tests which you want to do in the future, even though you haven't actually performed them yet. So that's pretty cool. So we already have kind of like done this step, or we at least know what there's to do. And then you have to do their different like review stages. So for example, you have to do a software planning review where you fill out a checklist for software requirements review. We'll actually look how that works in Formwork and saves you a lot of time there. We have a pretty cool feature there. Then you document software architecture. We talked about the soup list here actually, and we'll talk about more architecture items in the next few videos too. Then you have another review stage where you kind of like could do a code review, for example. Software system tests where you actually run the test. That's something we actually looked at in one of the past videos, how to run a test. So here you would do that pretty late into your development. So this is kind of like a bit like waterfall development. Finally, you need to do something called usability tests. So you actually have to test the software with real target users, like for example, physicians or patients, and do tests with them to prove that you developed the right thing and that they can use it. And that's what you do here, and something we'll expand upon in the usability course, which is also a separate section in the videos. And then in the end, you finish the risk assessment, and finally you release it. And essentially releasing it is actually not a lot of work, except that you have to create even more documentation where you just kind of like sign off on that that all the other documentation is complete. So again, it is not the most efficient approach, and it's not the most efficient approach, by the way, for me to explain all of this stuff in a video. Again, the text in this is pretty helpful, so take a look at the SOP Integrated Software Development, copy it to your important QMS and then SOP folder, copy it there as a document, and start filling it out. Best case, you literally just copy paste it. Worst case, you have some sort of customization, and again, beware of over-engineering here. Sometimes even, especially mid-sized companies, they think, no, but our software development process is so special, and that's why we need to spend 4 weeks now on customizing this document. I'm like, I mean, you kind of like have to see the goal here is also to get done at some stage. So the most efficient approach is read through it, minor changes, if at all, save it, understand it, and then kind of like change things as you go when you move forward with documenting stuff. All right, this was probably the biggest and the most important chunk of work, and also the most painful for you probably. So good job on actually watching this video. I'm not sure how often you fell asleep. I hope it was still mostly interesting. Once that is done, I think we can actually get into slightly more interesting things next.